We're very concerned about the fact that Bangalore as a city and as a site of a global economy is getting much more attention than the hinterland. So these are some concerns, but we also would like to see much more proactive, pro-people policies and programs being put across the state. One issue of concern is about increasing corruption at not only the administrative level, but at all levels in the state.
And what do you tell about the Congress guarantee schemes? Have they been approached very well?
Some of the guarantee schemes are working very well. We think both Annabhagya, the Shakti scheme, and the Gruha Lakshmi scheme are important, and they have benefited marginalized people, especially women. We think the Yuva Nidhi scheme needs to be revised substantially.
Ma'am, how do you see the promises which made by election campaign with the Congress government before elections? Do you think were they fulfilled all?
No, they've not fulfilled all. As the analysis showed, it's less than 10% have been fulfilled, but about 50% are in progress, and we hope that over the next 2.5 years, the Congress will work on these.
2 years, 134 promises, and just 6.7% delivered. That's what CIVIC Bangalore's New Citizens Review Report Card reveals about the Congress government's performance in Karnataka. Using RTI data and public records, the report looked closely at every promise made across 8 key sectors. The findings show a sharp divide. While the government has fully implemented its 5 guarantee schemes, progress elsewhere has been slow and uneven. Over half the promises, 54.5%, have not been started, and 37.3% remain incomplete. Without the guarantees, the actual completion rate falls to 3.1%. Only 4 non-guarantee promises have been fulfilled, including revising school textbooks, setting up EV charging points at metro and bus stations, passing the Greater Bengaluru Governance Act, and forming a welfare board for auto and taxi drivers. In this conversation, Kathyani Chamraj, Executive Trustee of CIVIC Bangalore and veteran journalist, and A. Krishna Prashant, a volunteer with CIVIC, speak about what this report tells us about governance, priorities, and accountability in Karnataka. This is a conversation about promises, performance, and what progress should truly mean for the people of Karnataka. Thank you so much for both of you to join us today. And let's begin with the thing that the government has fulfilled completely. So the 5 guarantees are the only promises that have been fully met in Karnataka. Now, do you see this as a social welfare success, or is it just fiscal populism, since it's taking a lot of money from the government's budget?
I think as far as the 5 guarantees are concerned, and I think any other sector as part of the analysis, this is my perspective is the perspective of a citizen, right? Again, I'm not an expert in either. I'm not an expert in economics or social welfare for that matter. But quickly, in terms of numbers, the government has budgeted to spend about 50,000 crores on the 5 guarantees, right? Which is nearly 16% to 17% of the total budget, right? So now the general perception among the public is that these are freebies and these are ways to buy votes, and these are probably fiscally unhealthy, right? So these are some of the opinions that you hear, and at least as far as the fiscal impact is concerned, that is partly true, because since the government has brought out the 5 guarantees, which was in 2023, the government has entered a phase of revenue deficit, right? Which means that we are borrowing to pay for salaries and subsidies and so on, right? It's typically okay in economic parlance when you borrow for capital expenditure like building factories, roads, and so on. But when you're borrowing for the purposes of paying money, then it counts as revenue deficit, right? So this is in context of a state like Karnataka, which has generally been very responsible, right? And we've always had revenue surpluses, except during the COVID period, right? So in that sense, the onset of 5 guarantees has, yes, put the state in a position that is not fiscally sound. If you look at it from the perspective of the FRBM Act, right? The FRBM sets some limits on how states should spend their money, right? So, for example, the Act mandates that the revenue deficit should be at 0, right? Whereas our revenue deficit right now is nearly, I think if I can get my number right, it is definitely not at zero. I think it's nearly at, let me just check that number and get back. But we're definitely far beyond the, the FRBM's limits, right? Same goes for fiscal deficit as well. The fiscal deficit FRBM limit is 3%, right, of the GDP, and we are currently at 2.95%, right? So we are very close to hitting the norms that FRBM has set. It also mandates that the state's debt levels should be at 25% of the state's GDP, right? And right now, I think we are at 24.5, right? So we're really close to hitting the established norms. So that is as far as the fiscal impact is concerned. But we should remember the broader context, right? Um, India is still, I mean, since 1991, the growth that India has seen has not created great gains for everybody, right? So while a few have benefited a lot, right, many have been left behind in that growth process, right? So while the IT sector has come and people have more jobs now, which is why you see Bangalore booming, a large proportion of the population is still suffering from lack of jobs, lack of steady employment. Price rise is a continuous phenomena, right? So, and I think there's also a World Bank report that states that 50% of India is one big expenditure or one big crisis away from poverty, right? So in that sense, even though we're not really poor, the population is still vulnerable to poverty, right? Vulnerable due to shocks, right, that can happen, such as health expenditures and big loans and so on. So that is why there is still need for social welfare, right? And that is where the guarantees are not bad, right? It's not like the guarantees are, something that's a freebie. It's necessary to support people in context of how the economy is, and how the state of inequality is in the state. But having said that, I think a couple of things to think about is, why do they call it the guarantees, right? The moment you say that these are 5 guarantees, that means that everything else is not guaranteed, right? So that effectively means that all the other promises that the state has made to improve healthcare, to improve education, to improve rural development, all of these are not guaranteed. Only the provision of money is guaranteed, and I think that is a bad place to be, right? But that also seems to be a bargain that has been established between the ruling elite and these and the citizens, right? Because the state is unable to deliver anything else, right? It's unable to deliver good health care, it's unable to deliver good education, basic service delivery is missing, there's corruption is rampant everywhere, right? So people are not expecting anymore, are not expecting the state to do much anymore, and they know that the state is not going to do much. And this is also clear for the political leaders, in my opinion. They also understand that the state is so corrupt and so entrenched in interests, right, that it's very hard for the state to achieve any of these real gains, such as education, health, rural development, and so on. So that is where the guarantees are like a bargain, like a compensation that the state has to offer to citizens, right? And I think finally, if you look at the surveys that were recently conducted by the Fiscal Policy Institute, which is a government body, they found that people largely believe, or the beneficiaries largely believe, that their lives have gotten better, which means that they're eating more food, they're having more meals, they're saving lots of money, right, up to 500 to 1,000 rupees per month. They're able to travel more, they have greater control and say on how money is spent, right? So these sort of benefits are also emerging, right? And I think globally, research also says that unconditional transfers also create good impact, right? So I think that is our opinion on the guarantees, right? While the guarantees are great, they provide some support to people, right? But at the same time, this is indeed like compensation, right? And these guarantees don't take away from the larger need to focus on health, education, and rural development, which, by the way, are extremely low in Karnataka. Karnataka spends less than the national average on education, health, and rural development, which is bad news, right? So the government needs to shore up its financial resources, needs to bring in more taxes so that it can start spending on these more important outcomes to build capabilities and capacities rather than just provide support.
Also, like you mentioned, even in education, only one promise has been fulfilled by the Congress government. And apart from the guarantees, only four have been completed as of today. And two promises have been marked failed in the report if because of missed deadlines again. So could you help us understand why this has been marked as failed, and do we expect should citizens expect more accountability, especially when it comes to time bound commitments? Even metros and elections, the municipal elections are something, those are time bound in a democracy, and yet we haven't had a municipal election in 5 years. So how do you view that?
Yeah. I think Kateni ma'am can talk about elections. I'll quickly cover on the failed promises. So our idea was simple. If there's a time-bound promise, and if they haven't met the promise within that time period, then it's failed. Simple, right? So the government had made two promises. One is to complete the metro projects in Bangalore, right? Which is, I think, Metro Phase 2, 2A, 2B within 1 year of coming to power, right? And then the other promise was to fill up all staff and teacher vacancies in government schools,
Within
right?
one
And
year.
aided within 1 year. So I think these are very tall promises and likely aimed at garnering votes, right? They don't seem to be serious because these are all established, experienced politicians who understand that uh, you know big metro projects and fulfilling, I mean, completing all teacher vacancies are not done in a year. So I think the party was not serious, and when it drafted this manifesto, and I think a part of the reason we are doing this exercise is to create that accountability, right? That you can't make promises which are not reasonable, right? And then walk away with it, right? So that is the idea. And I think we're going to continue to flag these issues over the coming years as well, right? Because it's only still 2 years of government. And so I think that is as far as failed promises are concerned. And yes, people should hold them accountable because these are important promises, right? They could have been reasonable. They didn't have to say that they'll complete it within 1 year. They could have said 3 years. They could have said 4 years. But they dug their own grave in some sense by calling it 1 year. So yeah.
They're holding them accountable now.
Absolutely.
And ma'am, you can tell us about the elections and the metro projects delay in that.
Yeah, it's very sad that constitutionally mandated elections have not been held, not only in Bengaluru but in several other cities also, and also in the Gram Panchayats for the Taluk and the Jilla Panchayat. They have not conducted the election. So as a result, in the rural area, they have pointed that out, I think, that 19,000 crore has been uh, held back because they have not conducted the election. I think the Central Finance Commission has recommended that the money should not be given. And the lack of election in Bengaluru has resulted in grave misgovernance because there are no local corporators and a local government. Terribly ad hoc plans are being made by the state level, which is totally against the 74th Amendment, which says there should be a third tier of government, which is a self-government, which plans for itself, which uses, financial resources as it wants to use, and it also has administrative control over its cadre of employees. Now, all those three powers, the planning power, the administrative power, and the financial power, has been taken away and given to a body called the Greater Bengaluru Authority, which has no constitutional status, and it does, and so it is a total overturning of the 74th constitutional amendment. And by taking away all these powers and not even conducting the election in time, for example, the 74th constitutional amendment clearly says that all planning for the third tier of government in a metropolis should be done by the Metropolitan Planning Committee. Now, since there has not been any election for 5 years, there is no Metropolitan Planning Committee with two-third membership from the local bodies and the surrounding rural areas. So the Metropolitan Planning Committee is supposed to be approving all plans for Bengaluru, but that doesn't even exist. And in its place, the Greater Bengaluru Authority, which is full of the state level officials and heads of all the parastatals, and with the CM and the deputy CM heading it, as the chairperson and vice chairperson, they are controlling the entire government of the local government. So, and they are making plans which have not been approved by the MPC, which is not part of the comprehensive mobility plan that was already established. And if they want to make any changes to the comprehensive mobility plan, like they are planning so many tunnel roads, expressways, even cutting through Lal Bagh, the historic heritage site of Bengaluru, and so they have not taken the approval of the Bengaluru Metropolitan Land Transport Authority while planning all these ad hoc infrastructure projects, the two very high-end infrastructure projects. And the BMLTA Act actually says if you start schemes which are not approved by BMLTA, you can be punished. A penalty can be put on the person who is developing these schemes. So, who's to be punished now for all these ad hoc schemes they have planned? And also that the Directorate of Urban Land Transport, which is the secretariat of the BMLTA, has itself said that these projects that are being finalized are unviable or unfeasible, and also not as per the due process of law. And hardly any studies have been done to justify these schemes, you know. And these schemes are incentivizing private vehicles, whereas the National Urban Transport Policy says clearly that you have to incentivize uh, non-motorized vehicles and also public transport. Now, public transport is on the back burner. The suburban rail system, which can carry 89,000 people per hour, that has been put on the back burner, and no progress is happening there on the four carriageways that they were planning. The metro is going to suffer because of these expressways being planned and parallel tunnel road being planned where a metro is already being planned. So the viability of the metro is also going to come down because the metro is able to carry 69,000 people per hour, whereas you are planning for a tunnel road of 16.5 kilometers or so, where just 1,600 people per hour will be carried. So, where is the justification for all these schemes, which are totally evading due process of law? So, this is a great handicap because more than 40,000 crore is going into these projects, and it is expected that even 1 lakh crore may go into it. And there's no justification for spending so much when, as Prashant pointed out, your average expenditure on health and education is lower than the national average. When just about, I think, 33,000 crore is earmarked for uh, education, and something far less is earmarked for health. And if only you would use this for 1 lakh crore to improve health, education, and also public transport, you would be solving so many problems. And not just incentivizing the 25 lakh car owners of Bengaluru, who are just 2.7% of the population of entire Karnataka. So it's unjustifiable spending so much money on just this elite section, you know. And we have filed public interest litigations on this, and the lawyers have told the court that it is bringing inequality before law. It is violating Article 14 if you're discriminating and prioritizing the needs of an elite section, affluent section, and neglecting the needs of the majority. So this is a gross thing that we have pointed out in our report card, that the governance of Bengaluru and also the other cities which are lacking in elections, local elections, it is a very bad mark on this government.
Also, I mean, the report card has majorly looked at the manifesto promises, and even then, we just know that the fulfillment rate is 6.7%, and 54.5% has not yet started the work of regarding the promises that the government made, and 37.3% is incomplete. So, when you see this data, does it suggest that there is a lack of administrative capacity? Like, we do understand that the filling all the vacancies of school teacher staff in government schools is a bit long term process. It cannot just happen in 1 year. Or is it a lack of political will also, especially when it comes to the promises that the government had made in their manifesto?
Yeah, I think these are definitely worrying numbers. And yes, I think both of these are fair reasons because number one, there is indeed a lack of seriousness about implementing these promises. I think the focus all along was we put out these 5 guarantees and then we'll see
The
about the
campaign
rest,
was
right?
on that when they won the election. It was
On
majorly
those,
one on the guarantee base.
the guarantees,
Yeah.
right? So that seems to be the case. I don't think they were very serious about these promises. And I think another interesting, excuse me, I think another interesting piece that we found in the manifesto was that there's also a mistake in one of the promises that they made, right? I think one of the promises in public health is that they would spend up to 5% of the state's GDP on public health, right? Which is a huge amount, by the way, right? And the promise should ideally have been to spend 5% as a proportion of the what do you call, as proportion of the budget, right, or the total expenditure. So they also cited the National Health Policy 2017, right, and they misquoted the National Health Policy, right, as part of this promise, right. So these are all small instances which convey that they were not really serious when they were drafting this manifesto, right. And of course, secondly, I think the state obviously lacks capacity. The state needs to invest in having a stronger bureaucracy and having greater incentives for the system to perform. I think both of these are fair reasons for the situation. And I think one thing that I want to quickly highlight is 70% of the promises yeah, have not started in the urban development sector, right?
Yeah.
And that brings back the focus a little bit on Bengaluru and the other cities in Bangalore, in Karnataka in general, right? I think that shows that the government is not serious about cities. It's not serious about addressing the problems of people who are living in the cities. And I think that's followed up by health, public health, and administration governance, which are again very critical sectors, right? Only I think about 65%, 64.3% have work not started status, right? I think these are three sectors which are absolutely critical, right? And the government needs to focus on them. And I think if they are not, then that's both a case of lack of sincerity, lack of intention, political will, but maybe also a case of lack of capacity.
Not just in the urban areas that we are not seeing development, the entire way the agriculture sector has been handled is very, very disappointing because you are trying to expand Bengaluru or even so you are acquiring land all around Bengaluru and trying to displace the farmers who are very happy cultivating on fertile land enough produce to sustain Bengaluru, supplying milk, fruits, vegetables, everything. And they're happy with their income because they're getting good income and their land is fertile and you're trying to displace them and not give them the compensation that they are due uh, as per the 2013 Land Acquisition Act. For to many of them, you are saying that compensation will be paid at a 20-year-old guidance value or under the BDA Act, which is no longer valid actually, now that the 2013 Act is there. And they have been deprived of developing their land or selling it or doing any development of any sort on that land because their land has been notified for acquisition. And for 20 years, they've been left without enough profit on that land. And now you want to compensate them at a very low rate. So how justifiable is that? And so they are all protesting, but you are not, responding to their protest, and you want to persist with the land acquisition, even though the Karnataka Industrial Areas Development Board, that act actually says unless 80% people consent to your land acquisition, you are not supposed to go through with it. So the KIADB is going ahead and acquiring land, fertile land, uh, for even airports, which they are not supposed to be doing. They're only supposed to promote industry. And so actually, there was a big conference recently by the farmers and many other stakeholders, and they decided that and have petitioned the CM also, saying that all fertile land should be declared as a green zone, so that no acquisition can happen, and so that they can, retain their livelihood, and and also it will affect our food and nutrition security. If more and more land is acquired, and the fertile land becomes less, then how much food we are producing will also become scarce, and that's not something we should be doing. So that is a very detrimental aspect of what they are doing right now to the rural area, and to the farmers also. So that is also another bad mark.
Also, apart from these promises, several things happened in these 2 years, like the stampede that happened after RCB's victory. Language war has been going on. Communal tensions have spread across Karnataka. We have seen few incidents being reported, and the apart from that, even the ORR traffic, I think that was in 2020 forward, I think, if I'm not wrong, where everybody was stuck for more than 3 hours. And it was pointed out even by the comedian. And all those things and the pothole accidents that keep happening. How and the severe water shortage that's going on in the city. How do you assess those situations, like the handling of those situations by the government?
Yeah, I think all of that really goes to show what the government's priorities are, right? So if I just look at it in terms of the promises as well, there's actually a promise that states that the government will um, ensure seamless integration of metro, suburban rail, public transport, right? And bring all of this public transport together with good integration. So this is actually a promise,
Yeah.
and a great promise at that, right? But there's also another promise called tunnel road, right? And elevated corridors. And the government has started progress on these two, but has absolutely forgotten about integrating these different modes of public transport, which is so important. It's a great promise, right? And they're not making any progress on that. It's not started. But these are terrible promises: the tunnel road, the elevated corridors, and so on. And they started making progress on this. So that goes to show that what the state's priorities are, right? And the political economy of today's politics is such that it seems to demand that parties focus on these sort of big projects which will generate big contracts, ensure great construction, right? I think that is the sort of political economy that we have today, right? And parties seem to be interested in going for these projects, right? So it's a very sad state of affairs, and this has very real implications. It's not just about traffic. Traffic is okay, but it has people have died, right? People die because of potholes on the road. I mean, especially two-wheelers, right? People are using two-wheelers, they're trying to avoid potholes, and they fall, and then a truck runs over them, or a bus runs over them, and these are all really sad instances, right, of what the impact of this political economy is, right? It's real. It costs us lives, right? And then as far as the stampede is concerned, I think that also goes to sort of it's like it's a symbol for it's a symptom of a larger malaise of illegality, right? If you look at what's happening across Bangalore, um, illegality is being condoned in every way possible. Right? Look at what's happening with B Khata to A Khata. Look at what's happening with revenue layouts, and all of these are examples of how illegality is condoned, illegality is maintained, and sometimes even encouraged. Right? So what happened with the stampede was also a case where the government was like, okay, so we can put the laws aside in this particular instance and let the rally happen. It would be a great, sort of brand building exercise. But that's what happens when you make this Faustian bargain, right? When you give up laws and you don't abide by laws in exchange for something like brand, right? I mean, ultimately the brand suffered, if anything, because of this illegality. So you didn't achieve anything, and instead you had loss of lives, which is horrible. So yes, I think the government has its priorities wrong. It needs to focus on ensuring that we have a good enforcement of laws, and that is the first objective of state, right? The first objective of a government is to ensure the that laws are drafted, laws are passed, and laws are maintained, right? Maintaining law and order is the primary responsibility of a government. And I think that in itself is a place where the state is failing. And I think that is the objective of this report card, right? It is to bring out these sort of issues.
Also, before we end, how do you view the role of opposition during this 2 year of time? Because for the functioning of the democracy, even opposition plays a very important role. So how do you rate them? I mean, though the report card has rated the government, but how would you rate the opposition here?
Yeah, I think rating the opposition is also a very important exercise, and maybe that's food for thought for us, right? On how do we evaluate the opposition better. So I think that's a fair point. And I think this is not an objective view. This is based on what we've seen so far. I think the opposition could do much better, right? Especially in terms of ensure. I think at least I speak for Bangalore, which is that in Bangalore, the opposition has taken a lot of time to wake up to the ills of these large construction projects. So it's only now that they have started talking about tunnel road, right? And citizens have been talking about it for the last 1 year, right? I mean, if you look at the GBGA, for example, which becomes GBGB now, the opposition actually walked out in the Vidhana. I think it was in the upper house, right?
Yeah.
So they actually walked out. They could have tried to influence the vote in the upper house, right? Because even though you don't have the majority, it's ultimately a vote of voice, right? In the upper house and in the lower house. So at least you could have shouted for the citizens, right? In the floor of the house. That is what an opposition should do rather than walking out. Which implicitly means that you agree with the bill and its unconstitutionality. It's a separate matter that outside they come and then they say that we are not in favor of the bill and so on. But what you do on the floor of the house is what matters, right? So I think that is where the opposition has let the citizens down with respect to the GBGA, right? Even with the KTCDA, act or rather bill at this moment, we don't see a lot of mobilization from the opposition because it's again a disaster as far as the environment is concerned, right? So I think these are a couple of instances, at least in the context of Bangalore, where I can say that the opposition has not played it's not been proactive. It's almost partly been in sort of in cahoots with the state, right, implicitly at least, if not in so I think these are disappointing. Yeah, I think Katyani ma'am would also have a perspective on the opposition's role.
Yeah, definitely, because they did not vote in the council. They walked out, allowing the bill to be passed, and then they made very public postures as though they are opposing the bill, and they even went and met the governor and told him not to give assent to the bill.
Yeah.
They could have done it themselves if they had remained in the council and not allowed it to pass. So it kind of exposes their double standards, and that's not a very good sign. But of course, we have to also point out that several laws that they said they would withdraw, what had been put in place during the BJP, like the anti-conversion law the cow slaughter law,
hijab
and even the
also.
one about the land acquisition, about land being allowed to be sold by the farmers.
Yeah.
They had said they would withdraw those laws. They have not withdrawn them.
Yeah.
So that is also, that speaks badly about the Congress also, because they had put it in their manifesto that they would withdraw these laws, and they're taking their own time about it. So it shows probably that they are also in league with those laws and don't really have the commitment to remove them. So
Yeah.
I think we have pointed out quite a few of the negative things, and but of course that the guarantees have increased the purchasing power of the common people by a large measure. That is a good sign. But like I pointed out, I would like to point out about the labor sector. They are also trying to bring minimum wages as per the Supreme Court judgment, which will say that you must provide a living wage, or at least a need-based wage, which will allow you to meet most of your basic needs. And that is in the process. And they're also trying to bring a labor policy which will ensure that the working class have a better dignified life. And I think enabling them to live a dignified life by earning their wages correctly is better than actually giving the guarantees, because then it leads to a dignified life and not stigma against you for having accepted some doles. So that way it would be better to increase the purchasing power of the common people by enhancing their wages and so on.
Thank you. Thank you so much for both of you to join us today and share all the insights regarding the report. Thank you so much.